The date was March 6th, the 17th year of the Chongzhen era. The setting sun bled through the carved windows of the Qinqing Palace, casting jagged shadows across my jade desk. The wind howled outside, carrying the stench of decay. I am Zhu Yujian, the Chongzhen Emperor. I stared at the mountain of reports on my desk, my eyes bloodshot and stinging. I hadn't slept in 3 days. Not since Ningwu Pass fell, and General Zhou Yuji died for the empire. The rebel forces were sweeping across the land like a tidal wave, and my own generals were surrendering without firing a single shot. Traitors, all of them, I rasped. My voice sounded like a broken bell. I gripped my brush so hard the veins on my hand bulged, but I couldn't stop the shaking. A drop of red ink splattered onto a report, looking exactly like a fresh wound on the map of my dying empire. In a fit of rage, I swept everything off the desk. Then, I collapsed back into my throne, tears of frustration streaming down my face. Li Ziqing's army was a net closing around the capital's throat. Was the Great Ming really going to end with me? My 34-year-old body finally gave out. The world blurred and spun. I didn't even have the strength to call for help before I slumped against the dragon chair and blacked out. I felt my consciousness sink into a dark vortex, crossing the boundaries of time and space. When I opened my eyes again, the world had turned upside down. There was no golden palace, no eunuchs. Instead, I saw steel pillars piercing the clouds and buildings made of glass. The roads were impossibly smooth, filled with roaring metal beasts. I looked down at my hands. I was a 7-year-old boy wearing strange, short clothes. At first, I was terrified. I was the emperor of the Great Ming. How could this happen? But as time passed, I adapted. I went to school. I learned simplified characters. I absorbed the vast knowledge of this new world. Then, one day in a library, I found a thick book on the history of the Ming dynasty. I found my name, Zhu Yujian. My title, Emperor Chongzhen. I read about my own end. On March 19th, the rebels would break through the city gates. My officials would scatter like birds. I would become a madman, forcing my empress to take her own life and cutting down my own daughters with a sword before hanging myself on Maishan Hill. Only one person would stay by my side until the end, my loyal eunuch, Wang Qinzhen. I read my own final decree. I am unfit to face my ancestors. Let the rebels hack my body to pieces, but do not let them harm a single one of my people. In that modern life, I screamed in the dead of night. I was bitter. I had worked myself to the bone for 17 years, yet I was destined for total ruin. But after the madness came clarity. In this new world, I saw the true flow of history. I learned modern strategy, logistics, and the power of disciplined firearms. I threw away my imperial pride and joined the army. I crawled through the mud and forged myself into a soldier. I thought I would live out this second life in uniform. Then, a searing pain ripped through my skull. My soul was pulled back into the abyss. I gasped for air, and my eyes snapped open. The modern lights were gone. The guns were gone. There was only the flickering candlelight, the dragon desk, and the suffocating pile of desperate reports. The smell of incense filled my nose. Everything was familiar, yet after 20 years of modern memories, it felt alien. I sat on the dragon throne, my chest heaving. My eyes were no longer those of a desperate king, but a sharp, battle-hardened soldier. "Old companion," I rasped. Wang Qinzhen hurried from behind a pillar, bowing low. "Your Majesty, you're awake." I turned my head stiffly. I looked at his aged face and remembered the body I saw hanging next to mine in the history books. My heart tightened. How long was I out?" "About an hour, sire," he replied softly. "An hour." 2 hours in the modern world. But in my mind, it had been 20 years. I had grown from a child to a man. I had studied history and bled in the trenches. Was it a dream? Or was I simply going mad from the stress? It didn't matter. The kick of a rifle and the words in those history books felt too real to ignore. Those 20 years had tempered my paranoid, frantic heart into cold steel. If it was a dream, it was a gift from my ancestors. If it was reality, I was now an emperor with the soul of a modern soldier and the knowledge of the future. I realized the gravity of the situation. Li Ziqing would be at the city walls by March 17th. I only had 10 days left. Outside were a million rebels. Inside was an empty treasury, a plague, and a court full of traitors ready to open the gates. My elite troops were rotten to the core. In the history books, this was a dead end. But the despair in my eyes was gone. In my dream, I had played out this scenario 1,000 times. I knew exactly what had to be done. I didn't have time to build modern tech, but I had something better. I had a plan. I had to rely on my own 2 hands and the power I held. I sat up slowly. My cloak slid off my shoulders and pooled on the floor. I ignored the mountain of funeral reports and defeatist letters piling up on my desk. Instead, I looked past the grand hall, my gaze piercing into the darkness of the night outside. 10 days. That was enough time to kill a lot of people. The water clock in the hall ticked away, marking the seconds of a dying empire. I stood before the imperial desk, looking at the petitions written by officials who were more interested in flowery prose than saving the country. To turn the tide, I had to spill blood. And to spill blood, I needed a blade. The court was full of scholars who could talk for days, but couldn't lift a finger to help. The elite troops outside the city were rotten to the core. The 3 great camps, once the pride of the Ming dynasty, had become nothing more than a retirement home for the relatives of the nobility. They drew salaries for ghost soldiers and spent their days as private servants for the rich. With the enemy at the gates, those old and sickly men couldn't even hold a musket steady. There was only one violent machine left in Beijing that still answered directly to the emperor. It was a blade that had been castrated and dulled by the civil officials 1,000 times, the Jinhui. The secret police. A name surfaced in my mind. Luo Yangxing. He was the left commander of the Jinhui. In 10 days, when Li Ziqing's rebel army would break through the city walls, this man, the head of my personal guard, wouldn't even draw his sword. He would be the first to open the gates for the rebels. Later, when the Qing army invaded, he'd shave his head and wag his tail for his new masters without a second thought. He was the definition of a spineless traitor. With a man like that in charge of my secret police, how could the Ming dynasty not fall? Wang Qinzhen, I called out. The old eunuch hurried forward. I am here, your majesty. Summon Luo Yangxing and the vice commander, Li Ruoyan. Tell them to come to the palace immediately. Wang Qinzhen bowed and quickly dispatched young messengers to carry the order. The spring wind whistled over the glazed tiles of the forbidden city, making an eerie, moaning sound. Luo Yangxing and Li Ruoyan were already on duty near the Meridian Gate, overseeing the city's defenses. When they received the urgent summons, they rushed to the inner court. Within the time it took to finish a cup of tea, I heard hurried footsteps stop outside the hall. The herald's voice rang out, sharp and high, announcing their arrival. They stepped over the high crimson threshold. Luo Yangxing walked in front. He was a burly man with a pale, greasy face. His bright red flying fish robe glowed under the candlelight. Li Ruoyan followed behind him. He wore a dark bull robe, his expression tense, a deep sense of worry etched between his brows. I remembered Li Ruoyan from the history books. He was a man of integrity. When the city finally fell, while the rest of the court knelt to welcome the rebels, he led his remaining men to defend the Xuanwu Gate. He fought until he couldn't fight anymore, then took his own life for his country. He was a real man. They walked quickly to the foot of the dais and knelt. Luo Yangxing and Li Ruoyan pay their respects to your majesty. Long live the emperor. Their knees hit the gold brick floor with a crisp thud. Usually, I would have told them to rise immediately. But today, I stayed silent. I sat behind the desk, looking down at them like a predator watching its prey. I stretched out my right hand, my thin fingers tapping rhythmically on the sandalwood table. Asterisk tap, 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 asterisk. Seconds stretched into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound in the hall was that rhythmic tapping. Sweat began to bead on Luo Yangxing's forehead, trickling down his neck. He was likely confused. Usually, when I called him late at night, I was anxious, asking for news about the rebels or begging him to find more silver. This silence was terrifying. Just as their knees were starting to go numb, I finally spoke. Rise. My voice was flat. They thanked me and stood up, keeping their heads bowed. I stood up as well and walked down the steps of the dais. My yellow imperial boots stopped right in front of Luo Yangxing. Luo, I said. Your servant is here, he replied, bowing again. I remember gifting you a spring embroidery blade. I said casually. Hearing the conversational tone, Luo Yangxing relaxed slightly. He probably thought I was trying to win his loyalty during this crisis. He lowered his body even further, his fatty face twisting into a sycophantic smile. By regulation, generals leave their blades outside the hall. But that blade was a gift from your majesty's grace. I wear it day and night. I would never dare to let it leave my side. I nodded and looked toward the door. Go. Bring the commander's blade inside. A small eunuch hurried in, carrying a magnificent, ornate scabbard. Wang Qingjin reached out to take it, but I raised my hand to stop him. I reached out myself and gripped the cold handle. A fine blade, I whispered. The scabbard was wrapped in sharkskin, the hilt inlaid with gold and silver, and the guard was set with a high-quality winter pearl. It was a weapon of pure luxury. I stroked the hilt gently. It's just a pity. Zheng. The harsh sound of metal sliding against metal tore through the silence. A flash of cold light cut through the dimness of the hall. I drew the blade, stepped forward, and swung. There was no hesitation. The muscle memory from 20 years of training in my dream exploded in that single moment. I put my weight into my waist and let my arm follow through. The blade sliced at a perfect angle. Squelch. The sharp edge tore through skin and muscle, brutally severing the neck bone. A fountain of hot liquid sprayed out. Luo Yangxing's head flew into the air, spun twice, and slammed onto the gold bricks. It rolled across the floor until it stopped at Li Ruoyan's feet. His eyes were still wide open, and that fake, flattering smile was still plastered on his face. The headless body stood upright for a second, blood geysering from the neck, drenching my yellow dragon robes in a gruesome pattern. Then, the corpse collapsed with a heavy thud. The eunuch holding the scabbard felt his legs give out. He slumped against a pillar, covering his mouth to stifle a scream. Wang Qingjin dropped his whisk, his face turning ghostly white. His master, the emperor, had just killed a man with his own hands. Your Majesty. Li Ruoyan slammed his knees back onto the floor, his forehead hitting the bricks repeatedly. It was too fast. One moment I was talking about the craftsmanship of a sword, and the next, I had decapitated the head of the secret police. The thick, metallic scent of blood filled the hall. I stood in the middle of the pool of red. I didn't bother wiping the blood from my face. I walked over to the body, carrying the dripping blade. I leaned down and grabbed the hem of that expensive, red flying fish robe. I wiped the blade clean on the fabric. Once. Twice. This blade was given to you to kill traitors, I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. Not for you to show off. I let the blood-stained fabric drop back into the puddle. I turned around, my boots leaving bloody footprints on the gold floor. Li Ruoyan. I am here, Li Ruoyan stammered. He was trembling. His warrior's intuition was screaming at him. He felt a pressure he had never experienced before. I sheathed the blade. My blood-soaked boots stopped inches from his face. The smell of death grew stronger as I leaned in. Li, I said, my voice eerily calm. Tell me, was I wrong to kill him? Li Ruoyan couldn't speak. The headless body was still leaking blood right next to him. If he said I was wrong, he'd be next. If he said I was right, he was complicit in the summary execution of a high-ranking official. Historically, an emperor never personally executed a minister in the palace. He slammed his head against the floor again. Your servant is terrified. I leaned down and grabbed his shoulder with my blood-stained hand, pulling him up until we were eye to eye. The Jinui, I whispered inches from his face, are supposed to be my heart and soul. My eyes and ears, the arm that holds my blade. But look at them now. They've become nothing but ornaments. The Jinui had become a joke. They were nothing but a tool for these wastes to gather wealth, a trash heap where they colluded with traitorous officials. Li Zicheng's rebel army was practically knocking on the gates of the capital, yet these parasites were still painting a picture of peace and prosperity. They spent every waking hour scheming about how to line their pockets while the empire burned. My roar echoed through the massive hall. Li Ruoyan's ears were ringing from the sheer force of my voice. He didn't dare look up. My loyalty is known by heaven and earth, he stammered, his forehead hitting the floor. If I harbor a second heart, may heaven strike me dead. At this point, he had no other choice but to offer me his soul. I let go of his shoulder, leaving a stark, bloody handprint on his fine silk uniform. "Li," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling calm. "If I didn't know you were loyal, if I didn't know you were a man with a backbone, I would have taken 2 heads just now instead of 1. Li Ruolian pressed himself even flatter against the ground. "I have a heavy burden to entrust to someone," I continued. "Do you dare to take it?" "I dare," he shouted back, his voice cracking with desperation. "I am willing to die 10,000 deaths for your majesty." I looked down at him. "How many men are currently on the Jinui rosters?" "Reporting to your majesty, there are over 83,000 personnel currently registered in the capital." I let out a cold, mocking laugh. I raised my boot and kicked the severed head of Luo Yangxing. It tumbled across the floor, slamming into a golden dragon pillar and leaving a dark red smear behind. "You're still trying to fool me with that ghost stories?" I growled. "If I truly had 80,000 elites, Li Zicheng's rebels wouldn't have made it out of Shaanxi. My banners would have trampled them into meat paste months ago." Li Ruolian's head hit the floor again and again. "I dare not deceive you. The rosters truly say 80,000. I don't want to hear about the rosters." I snapped. "How many of those are ghost soldiers used to embezzle salaries? How many are useless nobles holding empty titles? How many are street thugs who paid their way in? Do you think because I live deep in the palace, I am blind and deaf?" Li Ruolian turned pale. He realized the old games were over. I deserve death. Enough. The Great Ming is at its final hour. I don't have time to settle old debts with you. I leaned over him. "I'm asking you one thing. Out of those 80,000, how many can you actually command? How many will follow you to kill, to seize property, and to give their lives for me?" Li Ruolian hesitated for a moment. He slowly held up 3 fingers. "Your Majesty, the subordinates I personally trained, there are about 3,000. These 3,000 are true warriors. With one word from you, they will walk through fire and blades. They are absolutely loyal. 3,000. The Emperor's personal guard, the most feared force in the land, and only 3,000 were actually fit for battle. The roots of this empire were rotted through. But I wasn't disappointed. When the founder of the Ming dynasty started his rise, he had even fewer. When the Yongle Emperor began his rebellion, he only had 800. In this capital that was about to become a hell's cape, 3,000 sharp blades were enough. Fine, 3,000 it is." I turned my head toward the shadows. Wang Qingyin hurried forward from the darkness. "I am here. Draft an edict. Appoint Li Ruolian as the commander of the Jinui. Give him the flying fish robe and the title of junior protector of the prince. Also, promote Wang Guoxing and Gao Wenkai to be his deputies. Give them the bull robes." Li Ruolian was stunned. Wang Guoxing and Gao Wenkai were the hard bones of the guard, men who had been sidelined and suppressed because they refused to take bribes. I knew every single one of them. "Don't thank me yet," I said, stepping over Luo Yangxing's corpse. "Whether you keep that position depends on how well you work tonight. Leave the palace immediately. Gather your 3,000 elites. Tonight, you are going to raid Luo Yangxing's estate. And while you're at it, surround the residences of the Marquis of Jiading, Zhou Kuei, and the Grand Commandant, Tian Hongyu. Strip them of everything." Li Ruolian froze. "The Marquis of Jiading? But your Majesty, he is the Empress's father. He is your father-in-law." "This? What?" My voice turned into a dangerous whisper. "Are you more afraid of my father-in-law than you are of me?" "No. I only fear this will hurt the harmony between your Majesty and the Empress. It will damage the royal dignity. The country is falling," I shouted. "Who am I keeping my dignity for? For the rebels?" I had chosen these 3 targets carefully. Killing Luo Yangxing allowed Li Ruolian to take control of the Jinui instantly. Tian Hongyu was a greedy parasite who had used his daughter's status to hoard a fortune. And Zhou Kuei? He was the biggest miser in history. When I had begged the officials to donate money for the army, he, the emperor's father-in-law, pretended to be a beggar. He only gave 12,000 taels after the empress forced him to, and he even pocketed 5,000 taels she had given him privately to help. In the original history, when the city fell, the rebels found over 500,000 taels of silver in his cellar. If I could kill and rob my own father-in-law, who else in the court would dare to defy me? "I only want results," I said. "If you can't do it, I'll find someone who can." "I can do it. Li Ruolian's neck veins bulged as he shouted. I will not disappoint you. I grabbed a blood-stained, spring-embroidered blade from the desk and handed it to him. I hope this blade isn't just for show. And remember, if you want the horse to run, you have to feed it. I knew how the world worked now. Be fast. Be ruthless. Every ounce of silver you seize tonight, don't send it to the treasury. Bring it directly to the palace in wagons. Tell your men that every single person who participates in the raids tonight will receive 20 taels of silver. Cash. Paid on the spot. No delays. Even Wang Qingyan gasped. 20 taels was a full year's salary for a low-ranking guard who hadn't been paid in months. Li Ruolian's eyes turned red with emotion. As for you and your 2 deputies, I added, 2,000 taels each. The blood rushed to Li Ruolian's face. He took the blade with both hands. On behalf of my 3,000 brothers, I thank your majesty for your immense grace. Go, I said. Tonight, I want the sound of silver hitting the floor to be the only thing heard in Beijing. Li Ruolian backed out of the hall, turned, and sprinted away. Silence returned to the room. I felt a sudden, sharp pang in my stomach. My body was crashing from the adrenaline. Cheng'an, your servant is here. Clean this up, I said, gesturing to the blood and the body. And get me something hot to eat. From now on, you personally oversee everything I eat and drink. No one else touches it. I knew the old saying, a cornered dog will jump over a wall. The officials and generals were about to be pushed to the brink. They wouldn't hesitate to use poison. I obey. I won't let a single thing go wrong with your meals. Wang Qingyan bowed and hurried out. A short while later, he returned with 2 small eunuchs carrying a food box. They set out 2 bowls of plain white porridge, a plate of green vegetables, and half a roasted chicken. Your Majesty, it's late. This was all the imperial kitchen had, Wang Qingyan whispered. I watched them cook it myself. I tested it with a silver needle, and I tasted it first. I sat down. I was starving. In my past life as a survivalist, I had eaten tree bark and grass roots. I didn't care about luxury. I grabbed a chicken leg with my bare hands and started tearing into it, washing it down with gulps of porridge. Wang Qingyan watched me, his eyes moist. I wiped my hands. Killing and raiding were just the start. I had the money coming, but I needed men I could trust to hold the 9 gates of the city. My mind went to 3 names, Lu Wenbing, Lu Wenyao, and Gong Yonggu. In the original history, when the capital fell, these 3 had chosen to burn themselves and their families alive rather than surrender. They were the only ones I could truly trust. Summon them, I ordered. Tell new Marquis Lu Wenbing, Left Commandant Lu Wenyao, and Prince Consort Gong Yonggu to enter the palace immediately. Deep in the night, at the Jinyui headquarters, the freezing wind whistled through the courtyards. Suddenly, the thunderous sound of galloping hooves shattered the silence of the dead city. Li Ruolian flipped off his horse, the movement swift and heavy. Under the flickering torchlight, 2 bloody handprints on his green uniform looked terrifying. He didn't waste a second. He ordered the bells rung and the whistles blown. The sharp, shrill blast of the whistles and the heavy thud of the bronze bell tore through the silent night sky. Inside the guardrooms, the officers were jolted awake. Moments later, the drill ground was filled with shadows as men scrambled into formation. They weren't the glamorous Jinyui legends spoke of. Most of these men wore tattered armor, their faces gaunt and sickly. Even the emperor's own guards were starving in these chaotic times, squeezed dry by their superiors. 2 men stepped forward from the crowd, Wang Guoxing and Gao Wenkai. Commander, why the midnight assembly? Wang Guoxing asked, his voice gravelly. Has the rebel Lu Zongmin broken into the city? Li Ruolian didn't answer. He marched up to the command platform and drew his imperial jade-encrusted blade. The cold steel flashed, stinging the eyes of every man watching. Brothers, Li Ruolian's voice boomed like a temple bell. The rebels are at our gates. But while we starve, the high officials and imperial relatives in this city are still feasting. They're already planning how to sell us out to save their own skins. The crowd went deathly silent. By the emperor's command, Li Ruolian raised his blade high. We are to immediately raid the estates of the Marquis of Luoyang, Tian Hongyu, and the state father, Zhou Kuei. Anyone who resists, kill them on the spot. A collective gasp rippled through the ranks. They were going to raid the emperor's own father-in-law. Wang Guoxing and Gao Wenkai traded a look of pure shock. They were terrified. Li Ruolian took a step forward. The emperor has promised this. Every man who participates tonight will receive 20 taels of silver. It won't go through the treasury. It will be paid in cash, on the spot. The silence returned, followed by the sound of heavy, ragged breathing. 20 taels? To these men who didn't have a copper to their names, that was life-changing money. Commander, is the silver really being paid tonight? An officer asked, his voice trembling. I guarantee it with my head. Li Ruolian kicked an empty wooden chest nearby. The silver comes back in these boxes. If you don't get paid, you can kill me yourself. Let's do it, Gao Wenkai screamed, drawing his saber. Let's do it. The cry went up instantly. The sound of 3,000 blades unsheathing rang through the night. Li Ruolian looked at the crowd. They looked like a pack of bloodthirsty wolves. Move out, he roared. Back in the side hall of the palace, the air was thick with the smell of iron. Small eunuchs knelt on the gold-tiled floor, desperately scrubbing away bloodstains with wet rags. I watched the pinkish water swirl in their buckets. I had already changed out of my blood-soaked robes into a clean, deep blue gown. Wang Qingyin stood nearby, silently offering me hot tea. I took the cup, feeling the warmth against my fingers. In the 20 years of simulations I'd run in my dreams, the conclusion was always the same. Beijing was a death trap. The soldiers had no will to fight. The generals had no loyalty. The treasury was so empty, even the rats had left, and a plague was ravaging the north. The only thing keeping the Ming dynasty alive was the resources from the south. I had to get to Nanjing. I needed the grain, the money, and the natural defense of the Yangtze River. But I couldn't just flee. If I announced a retreat now, the civil officials would turn into rabid dogs. They'd use every moral argument in the book to trap me here until the city fell. They were afraid of losing their property and their power base. Even if I did escape without a plan, I'd arrive in Nanjing as a puppet with no prestige. I needed to fight my way out. I needed my own army and my own money. Footsteps hurried toward the hall. Your Majesty, Wang Qingyin whispered. Marquis Lu Wenbing, Left Commandant Lu Wenyao, and Prince Consort Gong Yonggu have arrived. Bring them in. The three men entered, the cold night wind clinging to their robes. Lu Wenbing looked stern and upright. Behind him, Lu Wenyao was burly and battle-hardened. Gong Yonggu, the last of the three, looked refined and scholarly. They knelt in unison. We pay our respects to your Majesty. As their knees hit the floor, they all stiffened. The faint scent of blood and the damp red stains between the floor tiles were impossible to ignore. There had been a slaughter in the palace tonight. Rise, I said, setting down my tea. We're family here. Skip the formalities. They stood, but kept their heads low. I didn't waste time with small talk. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want the honest truth, I said. How many personal guards do you have? Men who can actually kill, and who will follow only your orders? Lu Wenbing snapped his head up, staring at me. A midnight summons not to discuss the rebels, but to ask about private soldiers? He knew I was preparing for a desperate gamble. Your Majesty, Lu Wenbing's voice was hoarse. I have 200 guards. They were recruited by my late father, brave men who owe everything to the Lu family. Just say the word, and they will charge out of the city gates tonight. Private guards were worth 10 times more than the regular army. They lived and died with their masters. Lu Wenyao cupped his hands. I command the Yongding Gate. I have many soldiers, but only 80 are personal guards I can truly trust with my life. Gong Yonggu's eyes were red. He took a half-step forward and fell to his knees again, his forehead hitting the tiles with a heavy thud. Your Majesty, I beg you to listen. Beijing is lost. It cannot be held, his voice shook. Please, issue the decree to move the capital south immediately. As long as you are safe, the armies of the south will rally. Great Ming can still be saved. In the past, I would have screamed at him for such cowardice. But tonight, I felt a wave of warmth. This was a man who actually cared if I lived or died. I know what I'm doing regarding the south, I said quietly. Gong Yonggu looked up, stunned that I hadn't exploded in rage. We aren't talking about that yet, I continued, standing up and walking toward them. Tomorrow, I'm putting you three in charge of the city gates. And there's more. Tomorrow morning, I'm opening my private stores to give you silver. This money will not touch the Board of Revenue or the Board of War. It won't pass through the hands of any eunuch supervisors or generals. I leaned in, my voice low and sharp. You will pack that silver into chests, carry it onto the city walls yourselves, and hand it directly to the soldiers in front of everyone. The three of them turned pale. Your Majesty, this is against all regulations, Lu Wenbing stammered. Paying the troops directly? It will look like we are raising a private army. Regulations? I let out a cold laugh. It's those damn regulations that brought us here. The court allocates 10,000 taels, and by the time it reaches the soldiers, there isn't even 1,000 left. The men are starving. Their families are selling themselves into slavery just to eat. And you expect them to take a blade for me? I stared Lu Wenbing down. I want every soldier on those walls to feel the weight of that silver in their hands. I want them to know this money came from me. It's the emperor's price for their lives, not some scraps dropped by a corrupt official. If I can buy the loyalty of even 1,000 men, this dead game can still be won. I paused. The plague is spreading. When you recruit, anyone coughing or with a fever must be quarantined immediately. I'll give you the protocols tomorrow. They were speechless. I was bypassing the entire government to build a personal force. It was radical. It was dangerous. And it was the only way. We obey your command, they shouted, their voices thick with emotion. My expression softened slightly. One more thing. Go home tonight. Have your wives and children pack their things. The moment the gates open tomorrow morning, send them south. Lu Wenbing's throat moved as he tried to speak, but I cut him off. Don't ask. Just do it. This is my personal favor to you. I looked them in the eyes. You three are staying here to risk your lives with me. I won't let your bloodlines end here. These three hardened men were now weeping openly. I suppressed the bitterness in my own heart and turned my gaze to Gong Yonggu. It was time to move. Gong Yonggu wiped the sweat and grime from his face, his voice trembling as he addressed me. Please, Your Majesty, give us your orders. I stayed silent for a long time. The image of my sister, Princess Huang, flashed through my mind. Her body was still cold, waiting for a burial that might never come. Tonight, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Burn her remains. Gong Yonggu froze. The color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. Your Majesty, his voice rose in a piercing, jagged cry. She is a princess of the Great Ming. She has not even had her grand funeral. How can we simply set her ablaze? This is sacrilege. In the Ming dynasty, only the most heinous criminals or beggars infected with the plague were cremated. For a princess to be reduced to ash by her own brother was unthinkable. I will issue a special decree, I said, turning my head away. I couldn't bear to look at his tear-streaked face. Hongtu, there is no time for a burial. Once the city gates are breached, you know exactly what those rebels will do. Do you want to stand by and watch them desecrate her body? Do you want those beasts to insult her even in death? I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Burn her. Let her turn to clean ash. Let your son carry her remains with him when he flees. This is the last bit of dignity I can give her as a brother. Gong Yonggu shook violently. He realized then that I was preparing for the absolute worst. He saw the desperation in my eyes, the realization that the great Ming Empire had fallen so far that it couldn't even protect the bones of its own royalty. Despair swallowed him whole. He slammed his forehead against the hard, golden floor tiles with a sickening thud. I obey, he choked out, his heart clearly breaking. He understood. Better to let her soul return to the heavens in a pillar of smoke than to let her corpse be shamed by the mob. I waved my hand, signaling them to leave. The three men struggled to their feet, bowed deeply toward the dragon throne, and stumbled out of the hall. Once they were gone, I turned my gaze to the shadow standing beside me. Wang Chinen. I am here, servant, he replied immediately. In this vast palace, I asked quietly, how many people truly belong to you? The question was soft, but it made Wang Chinen break into a cold sweat. Eunuchs forming factions was a capital offense. It was the same charge that had destroyed Wei Zhongxian. He dropped to his knees, his forehead hitting the floor. Your Majesty, please. I have served you since childhood. My heart belongs only to you. I have never formed a faction, nor have I taken any godsons or followers. I looked down at the old man, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. If you told me right now that you had 5,000 secret agents hidden away, I wouldn't kill you. I'd reward you. Wang Chenin didn't dare look up. He kept his body pressed low to the ground. There is something I need to do, I said, leaning in. And you are the only one I can trust. I am sending the princes, Lang, Jiong, and Zhao, along with the empress and the others to Nanjing. Wang Chenin bolted upright, his eyes wide. He knew what this meant. The empire was collapsing. Sending the heirs to Nanjing was the only way to keep the Ming bloodline alive. But the road was long, and the world was in chaos. If the escort wasn't made of absolute loyalists, they would sell the princes to the rebels for a bounty before they even left the province. To answer your majesty, Wang Chenin whispered, his voice steadying. In the inner departments, there are about 20 young eunuchs I personally promoted years ago. They haven't been tainted by the politics of the outer courts. They've served at your doorstep for years. Their lives are tied to yours. If we send the young masters south, those 20 will fight with their very teeth to clear a path. He paused, then added, there are also a few in the imperial stables I've watched grow up. They have skill with blades and no ties to the officials. They can be used. I nodded. That's enough. Use your influence to pick the best. Do it quietly. No one must know. I stood up and made my way toward the cunning palace. It was late, and the palace lanterns flickered violently in the wind. I didn't wait for the guards to announce me. I stepped over the threshold and entered. The scent of sandalwood hung cold in the air. A beautiful woman sat under a lamp, stitching a man's robe. When she heard my footsteps, she immediately put down her needle and stood. My empress pays her respects to his majesty, she said. This was Empress Zhou. She was stunning, but years of worry and forced frugality had left her thin. Her silk robes were washed so many times they were fading, and I could see the fine repair work on her sleeves. To save money for the army, she had spent her days spinning thread and weaving cloth, living more simply than a common merchant's wife. Empress, there is no need for such formality, I said, catching her arms as she tried to bow. In the history I knew, she was forced to commit suicide to preserve her honor when the city fell. I wouldn't let that happen again. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. Usually, I was a ball of anxiety and rage, but tonight, that was gone. I smelled of blood and cold resolve. Have you eaten, your majesty? She asked softly. I have some silver ear and lotus seed soup warming in the kitchen. I've eaten, I said, leading her to a soft couch. Don't worry about the soup. Send someone to fetch my sister-in-law, Empress Ian. Empress Zhou blinked in surprise. Empress Ian, Zhang Yan, was the widow of the previous emperor. Her? It's so late. Is there something urgent? Just go, I said. I have things to say to both of you. 15 minutes later, the sound of jade charms clinking announced her arrival. Zhang Yan entered, dressed in a simple white palace gown. She was tall and elegant, her beauty sharp and clear. Since the death of consort Tian, she had been raising the fifth prince, and the child's energy seemed to have given her a bit of life. Greetings, your majesty, she said with a slight bow. I stood and returned the gesture. I didn't dare act superior with her. If it weren't for her support back when the previous emperor was dying, and her protection against the eunuch Wei Zhongxian, I might never have taken the throne. We sat down. I didn't waste time with small talk. I looked at these two women who were about to be swept away by the end of the world. I have decided, I said firmly. I am sending you, the 3 princes, and the 2 princesses out of the city. You are going south to the secondary capital. Empress Zhou gripped her handkerchief so hard her knuckles turned white. All the color left her face. South? Does that mean? Beijing cannot be held. She stared at me, her voice trembling. Are you coming with us? I looked away. If I left, the defense of Beijing would collapse instantly. Li Ziqing's army would hunt us down like dogs. I had to stay. I have other arrangements, I said. You go first. Empress Zhou's eyes turned red, and tears began to fall. If you aren't going, I won't go either. I will die here, in the Forbidden City. Don't be foolish. My voice cracked like a whip, but I quickly softened it. If you don't go, what happens to the children? As Zhou sobbed, Zhang Yan suddenly spoke up. I obey your command. Her voice was steady, devoid of any unnecessary emotion. She looked me in the eye. She was a brilliant woman. She knew that crying now would only cause more chaos. Things had clearly reached a breaking point, and the only priority now was saving the bloodline. Sending the family away was the only thing they could do to help me now. Zhang Yin stood up and performed a graceful bow. She agreed to take Prince Zhao and wait for my signal to move. I added one more condition. They had to split up. Traveling in a large group was too eye-catching. We couldn't risk being spotted by rebel scouts. There were no long, tearful goodbyes from her. Zhang Yin simply nodded, understood the gravity of the situation, and took her leave. She was a woman of iron. Now, only my wife, Empress Zhou, and I remained in the hall. She was still sobbing quietly. I knew she was terrified. To her, this felt like an eternal parting. I looked at her, and though it felt cruel, I had to speak the truth. Fenger, I said, my voice turning cold. I just issued an imperial decree. I sent the Jinui to raid your father's house. Zhou Kuei is being stripped of everything. The sobbing stopped instantly. Empress Zhou froze, her face turning ashen. A raid? On the house of the emperor's father-in-law. She slid off the couch and fell to her knees at my feet. Your Majesty. Why? What crime has he committed? My father has no money. He's always been cautious and frugal. If you need funds for the army, I'll go beg him again. I'll make him sell his house. But if word gets out that the crown prince's maternal family was raided, how will the prince ever hold his head up? She was rambling, desperate to save her father. She couldn't believe I would treat the Grand Preceptor like a common criminal. I looked down at her, my expression unmoved. Cautious and frugal? I sat still, my voice flat. Do you remember when I begged the officials and relatives to donate for the army? You saved 5,000 taels of silver from your own living expenses. You gave it to him so he could lead by example. Empress Zhou nodded through her tears. I remember. I let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Lead by example? When I asked him to donate, he cried poverty and said he only had 10,000. I ordered him to find 20,000. He came to you, crying, and you gave him your 5,000 taels to help him reach that goal. And do you know what he did? He pocketed 3,000 of your silver for himself. He only handed over 12,000 to the Ministry of Revenue, all while wailing that his family was starving. What? Empress Zhou gasped. No, that's impossible. That was money for the national crisis. My father, how could he be so foolish? To steal his own daughter's savings? Foolish. I leaned forward. I'll tell you what he is. Your father used his title to hoard wealth all over Beijing. He sold offices. He traded favors. Right now, in the cellars of his mansion, there are no less than 500,000 taels of silver hidden away. 500,000, she whispered. The treasury was empty. My soldiers hadn't been paid in months. I was going gray from the stress of trying to find a few thousand taels to save the empire, and my own father-in-law was sitting on a mountain of gold. He wouldn't even spare a fraction of it to save his own son-in-law's throne. He had even stolen from his daughter's personal pocket. Empress Zhou's lips trembled. She wanted to argue, to say it was a lie, but she saw the look in my eyes. I wasn't joking. A wave of shame and betrayal washed over her. I will send someone to scold him immediately, she sobbed, her head hanging low. I have no face to see you, Your Majesty. Don't worry about it anymore, I said, standing up. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. A cold night wind rushed into the hall, making the candles flicker violently. The Jinui should be finishing up by now. I kept my back to her. I told Li Ruoyan to spare his life. But the money? I'm taking every single cent. That is the Ming Dynasty's life-saving money, not his funeral fund. Behind me, the Empress collapsed on the floor, weeping in silence. She didn't dare argue further. If a man can't even manage his own household, how can he manage an empire? It was time to be ruthless. Meanwhile, at the Marquis of Jiating's mansion, the atmosphere was very different. The charcoal fires were burning hot, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted venison and steamed bear paws. Zhou Kuei sat at a massive mahogany table, holding a golden jade cup filled with dark red wine from the western regions. He was celebrating. Because of the crisis, I had recently promoted him from Count to Marquis just to keep him happy. The Emperor is desperate for a few thousand taels, Zhou Kuei laughed, raising his cup to the wealthy merchants and relatives sitting with him. He's handing out titles like candy. To a great future. Drink up. A fat merchant leaned in, his voice oily with flattery. The Marquis is at the height of his power. The Crown Prince is your grandson. The Empress is your daughter. In all of Ming, who would dare cross you? Zhou Kuei leaned back in his chair, stroking his thin beard. Naturally, as long as we follow the rules, this wealth will last 10,000 years. He hadn't even finished his sentence when a deafening crash echoed from outside. Screams and the sound of breaking porcelain followed. Zhou Kuei slammed his cup down, staining the tablecloth. Who is the idiot making noise outside? You're ruining my mood. Before he could scream again, boom. The heavy Phoebe wood doors were kicked open with such force they shattered against the floor. Dust swirled in the wind as dozens of men in green uniforms flooded the room. They all carried the signature embroidered spring blades of the secret police. Jinui, we are here on official business, a voice barked. Everyone get on the ground. Move and you die. The room turned into chaos. The fat merchant scrambled under the table. The relatives huddled in the corners, trembling. Zhou Kuei, fueled by wine, stood up, his fat shaking with rage. Presumptuous, he shrieked, his finger trembling as he pointed at the guards. Are you blind? This is the Marquis of Jiating's house. I am the Emperor's father-in-law. Who gave you the balls to break in here? The Jinui didn't answer. They just started grabbing people. A few of the house guards tried to interfere with wooden staves. Swing, blades flashed in the candlelight. Screams ripped through the air as severed arms hit the floor, knocking over the plate of bare paws. Hot blood sprayed across Zhou Kuei's face. The smell of iron hit him. He sobered up instantly. Rebellion? This is rebellion. He stumbled back, tripping over his chair and falling flat on his ass. I want to go to the palace. I want to see the Emperor. I'll have you all executed. Heavy footsteps crunched over the broken porcelain. A tall figure stepped over the threshold. He wore a dark cloak with the insignia of the Jinui and 2 bloody handprints on his chest. It was Li Ruolian. Lord Zhou, Li Ruolian said, looking down at him with cold eyes. Stop shouting. It's the middle of the night. You aren't going anywhere, and your complaints will never reach the Emperor. Zhou Kuei recognized him. Li Ruolian. You dog. If you touch a single hair on my head, the Empress will have your head. The Crown Prince will destroy you. Slap. The slap echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Li Ruolian didn't hold back. The force of it spun Zhou Kuei halfway around, his fat face swelling instantly. 2 bloody molars flew out of his mouth and clattered into the corner. The room went dead silent. Even the guards who were howling on the floor from their severed limbs shut their mouths, clutching their wounds in terror. A Jinui commander had just struck the Emperor's father-in-law. Li Ruolian shook out his hand and pulled a roll of bright yellow silk from his robe. He didn't unroll it. He just shoved it right in front of Zhou Kuei's bulging eyes. Take a good look, Li Ruolian hissed. Imperial orders. By His Majesty's command, the Marquis of Jiating, Zhou Kuei, has been found guilty of hoarding wealth while the nation starves. The Jinui are ordered to seize all assets immediately. Resistance is treason. Zhou Kuei froze, clutching his throbbing cheek. That brilliant imperial yellow stung his eyes more than the slap. His son-in-law? The Emperor? How could he do this? Before he could process it, Li Ruolian's boot slammed into his chest. Zhou Kuei collapsed backward, gasping and retching from the pain. Bind him, Li Ruolian ordered. 2 officers stepped forward and tied him up like a hog with thick hemp rope. One of them grabbed a greasy tablecloth, balled it up, and stuffed it brutally into Zhou Kuei's mouth. They dragged him into a corner like a sack of trash. Take the rest of them, Li Ruolian commanded, turning to walk out onto the steps. He looked out at the hundreds of brothers waiting in the courtyard, their torches flickering in the night wind. Brothers, his voice boomed. His Majesty has issued a decree. Every man participating in tonight's seizure will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. Cash on the spot. I heard the heavy, ragged breathing of the men below. 20 taels was a fortune to them. Furthermore, Li Ruolian's voice turned ice cold. His Majesty has a warning. If anyone's claws are dirty, if anyone dares to tuck even a single ounce of silver into their own pocket. He drew his imperial spring blade halfway. The steel reflected the orange torchlight. Don't blame my blade for forgetting our brotherhood. We obey the imperial decree. The men roared, their voices shaking the night sky. We serve the Emperor. The pillage of the Marquis's estate began with lethal efficiency. Half an hour later, Wang Guoxing hurried into the main hall, his face grim. "Sir," Wang Guoxing whispered to Li Ruoyan. "The men have flipped the front and back courtyards. We've only found 3,000 taels of loose silver and a few crates of paintings." In the corner, Zhou Kuei made a muffled, desperate sound. Li Ruoyan signaled to pull the gag out. "I have always lived in poverty," Zhou Kuei shrieked. "I don't even dare to add 2 extra dishes to my meals. You're wasting your time. When I see the Emperor tomorrow, I'll have your skins." Li Ruoyan frowned. 3,000 taels? Just days ago, this old man had donated 12,000 to the treasury under pressure. There was no way the Emperor's father-in-law was this broke. My voice echoed in Li Ruoyan's mind, certain and cold. "Search everything. Keep digging," Li Ruoyan barked, kicking over a massive flower pot. "Dig 3 feet down. Strip the plaster off the walls." In the back library, Gao Wenkai paced in front of rows of sandalwood bookshelves. Rare books and ancient scrolls were tossed aside like trash. He stared at the floor tiles. When he reached the area behind the desk, he stopped. He flipped his sword and slammed the heavy hilt against the stone tile. Thump! Thump! It sounded hollow. Gao Wenkai's head snapped up. "Bring the sledgehammers." Strong men rushed in and swung. The stone shattered, revealing a thick iron plate beneath. They pried it open with crowbars, and a rush of cold, metallic air surged out of the dark hole. Gao Wenkai grabbed a torch and descended the stone steps. He took one look and nearly dropped the flame. "Commander! Lordly!" he screamed, his voice cracking. Li Ruoyan rushed down. The torchlight filled the underground vault. There was no furniture. There were only chests, dozens of massive camphor-wood crates stacked neatly. Against the far wall, silver ingots were piled up like a brick wall, reaching halfway to the ceiling. Gold bars, jade ornaments, and pearls were heaped in the corners like common gravel. The officers behind him stopped breathing. This was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Li Ruoyan walked to the wall of silver and ran his hand over the cold metal. His throat tightened. "The Emperor was right," he whispered. "This old dog really did hide a mountain of gold in his house." He turned and roared. "1 squad stays to count and load the wagons. The rest of you, follow me to the next house." As the first light of dawn broke, the ledgers from 3 major estates were gathered. Li Ruoyan stood before a mountain of silver chests. He drew his blade and smashed the lid of the top crate, sending fresh silver ingots rolling across the dirt. "Come here," he shouted to his men. "Every single one of you. 20 taels. I'm paying you right now." The courtyard went silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into a deafening cheer. The officers lined up, their hands trembling as they took the heavy silver. Some bit the metal to be sure, tears streaming down their faces. Their families were starving at home. This was life-saving money. They knelt toward the palace, their foreheads hitting the ground. "Long live the Emperor! Long live the Emperor!" Back in the west-warming pavilion of the Forbidden City, I sat at my desk. Using what I remembered about modern military hygiene, I finished writing out a plague prevention plan. Ventilation, isolation, lime for disinfection, boiling all drinking water, masks. I set the plan aside and took a fresh sheet of paper. I picked up the red brush. I wrote 3 names: Wang Dehua, Wang Zhixin, Du Zhiji. These were the 3 biggest parasites in the palace. In the history I knew, when the rebels entered Beijing, these 3 couldn't wait to kneel. Wang Dehua opened the city gates. Wang Zhixin cried about being poor, but was found with 300,000 taels. Du Zhiji surrendered a key pass before the rebels even arrived. My gaze turned cold. I circled their names in blood-red ink. Next to them, I wrote 2 words: seize everything. No public trials. No bureaucracy. Their lives and every cent they stole from the people belonged to the state now. I picked up a 3rd sheet of paper. This time, I used a fine wolf hair brush. My movements slowed, becoming heavy with respect. Fan Jingwen, Ni Yuanlu, Li Benghua. In the history of the Ming's fall, while hundreds of officials fought to welcome their new rebel masters, these few chose to die for their country. Fan threw himself into a well, and I hanged his entire family. Li left a poem of loyalty before taking his own life. Fan was blunt but stubborn, a man who knew how to build cannons and get things done. and I was an idealistic scholar, but the treasury was a mess. I needed a greenhorn who wasn't afraid to offend the old guard to break the corruption open. I tapped the brush against Li Banghua's name. He knew the military. He had tried to fix the corrupt Beijing guards before, but the eunuchs and nobles had pushed him out. I needed them. And now, thanks to the donations from my father-in-law, I finally had the money to buy their loyalty and the empire's survival. I decided to send Li Banghua to Nanjing. If I gave him the military power, he could reorganize the southern forces into a formidable army. Then, I kept writing. Fang Yuegong, Qiu Yu, Linizhu, Shi Bangyao, Ma Shiqi, Wu Linzheng, Meng Zhaoxiang, Lu Lishan. One by one, I listed the names. This was the last bit of life left in the Ming dynasty. They were the only sturdy planks remaining on this sinking ship. I looked at the short list and felt a bitter irony. In such a massive court filled with noble officials, when the nation was facing total extinction, the people I could actually trust didn't even fill one hand. I tossed the brush into the porcelain washer. The ink bloomed in the clear water like spreading blood. Back when the first emperor started in Haozhou, he only had a few brothers by his side. I stood up, leaning my hands on the desk. Even if Beijing was destined to be a graveyard, I would drag every parasite and traitor down into the dirt with me first. I was about to start a list of military officers when I heard hurried footsteps outside. Wang Chenin pushed the door open and rushed over the threshold, his wrinkled face flushed red. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "What is it?" I didn't even look up. I moved the wet paper to the side to dry. "Li Ruoyan, the commander of the Jinyue, has returned to report," Wang Chenin whispered. "He's waiting outside the East Flower Gate. But the palace gates have been locked for hours." I glanced at the water clock in the corner. It wasn't even dawn yet. His efficiency was impressive. "Bring him in." 15 minutes later, Li Ruoyan entered. His footsteps were heavy. His dark uniform was coated in dust and splattered with large patches of dried, black blood. As he walked, the smell of iron and the damp stench of a cellar filled the hall. He started to bow, but I waved him off. "I only want the numbers," I said. Li Ruoyan stood straight and pulled a thick ledger from his robe. Wang Chenin took it and handed it to me. Li's voice was hoarse, heavy with the exhaustion of a night spent killing. "Luo Yangxing's residence has been fully searched. We found over 103,000 taels of silver. We also seized 13 crates of famous paintings and antiques, valued at no less than 50,000 taels. The suburban land deeds haven't been tallied yet." I flipped through the ledger without saying a word. "The entire Luo family, over 20 people, has been imprisoned," Li Ruoyan continued. "I left my best interrogators from the North Precinct to attend to them in the dungeon. Luo ran the Jinyue for years. There's no way this is all he has. Within 3 days, I'll make him spit out every cent hidden in his secret properties." I snapped the ledger shut. 100,000 taels wasn't even enough to get started. "What about Zhou Kuei and Tian Hongyu?" The hall went silent. Li Ruoyan's throat moved as he swallowed hard. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he dropped to his knees. "Your Majesty, we dug through the cellar at the Marquis of Jiaoding's estate." He paused, his voice trembling. "We found 530,000 taels of silver and 15,000 taels of gold. 530,000 taels. I felt a cold rage bubbling up. Last year, the entire national treasury didn't even have that much. My border armies were on the verge of mutiny every day because they lacked a few 100,000 for pay. I had humiliated myself recently, begging these officials to donate for the war effort. This man, my own father-in-law, had wailed in front of me about being poor. He wore patched sleeves to court and acted like every penny he gave was a drop of his own blood. He eventually squeezed out 12,000 taels. And yet, in his cellar, the silver was stacked like walls. I leaned back in my chair. Seeing the numbers in a history book was one thing, but hearing the reality from the man who dug them up was a physical blow. 530,000, I repeated softly. My dear father-in-law would rather see Beijing fall than part with his coins. I stood up and walked over to Li Ruoyan. "And Tian Hongyu. At the Tian estate, we found over 450,000 taels of silver and 18,000 taels of gold. We loaded 30 large wagons with gold and silver vessels and rare treasures. Total value is nearly 1,000,000 taels. This was just 2 families. How many more parasites were hiding in this city? Every single official probably had mountains of gold in their homes. How were they handled? I asked. Except for Zhou Kuei himself, the rest of the family has been detained at the estate, Li Ruoyan replied, keeping his head low. Without your decree, I didn't dare act further. Zhou Kuei was the empress's father. Tian Hongyu was the father of the late consort Tian. They were imperial relatives. Li Ruoyan wasn't sure if I would show mercy. Why keep them there to eat for free? I slammed my hand on the desk. Send all the able-bodied men to the city gates. Let them carry logs and stones for the soldiers on the walls. If anyone complains or retreats a single step, execute them on the spot. Li Ruoyan shivered. He realized I was leaving no room for sentiment. Bring all that silver and treasure into the palace, I commanded. Li Ruoyan cupped his fists. Understood. He hesitated, bowing even lower. Your Majesty, by tradition, for such a massive transport of wealth, should I request several eunuchs from the Directorate of Ceremonies to oversee the process? This was the iron rule of the Ming dynasty for 200 years. Generals were watched by eunuchs. Civil officials supervised the military. If a soldier even looked at money without a eunuch present, it was a death sentence. Li Ruoyan didn't want to break the taboo, especially with millions of taels at stake. I leaned over the table, watching him in silence. Then, I let out a short laugh. Li Ruoyan, I am here. Do you think I don't trust you? Li Ruoyan immediately hit his head against the floor. I am loyal to your Majesty. I have no greed in my heart. It's just, the rules have always been this way. I fear the gossip of others. I fear it will stain your ears. The rules. I sneered. It's these damn rules that pushed my empire to the edge of the grave. My voice rose. I'm putting my life in your hands. Do you think I'm afraid of you stealing my silver? Li Ruoyan's entire body began to shake. To the civil officials, men like him were just crude warriors. To the eunuchs, they were just dogs. They had to kowtow to governors and smile for the palace castrates. I won't send anyone. I walked around the desk and grabbed Li Ruoyan's arms, pulling him up. You personally escort this money to me. If a single ounce is missing, I'll hold you responsible. A man dies for the one who truly knows his heart. Li Ruoyan's eyes turned red. He bit his lip, forcing back his emotions. He squeezed his fists until his knuckles cracked. I will not fail you, your Majesty. That's more like it. I patted his dusty shoulder. I turned back to the desk and picked up the paper I had just finished. Wang Chunin quickly took it and held it out to Li Ruoyan. Look at this, I said, sitting back on my throne. Li Ruoyan took the paper. There were only 3 names on it: Wang Dehua, Wang Zhixin, and Du Zhiji. Each name was circled in blood-red ink. Next to them, I had written 2 heavy words: seize everything. These 3 were the biggest powers in the palace. Wang Dehua ran the Eastern Depot. Wang Zhixin was a high-ranking eunuch in the Directorate. Du Zhiji controlled the imperial stables. Moving against them meant taking a knife to the very heart of the inner court. What? Are you afraid? I picked up a fresh cup of tea and blew on the surface. You already raided the emperor's father-in-law. Are you going to let a few house slaves scare you? Li Ruoyan looked up, a fierce, predatory light in his eyes. I am not afraid. The Jinui had been suppressed by the Eastern Depot eunuchs for years. Generations of his men had suffered humiliation at their hands. Now that he had my permission, he looked like he wanted to go and skin them alive right now. These 3 old dogs are traitors, I said casually, taking a sip of tea. This job will be a lucrative one. They probably have more grease on them than the imperial relatives. I set the cup down. Take Wang Dehua yourself. Give Wang Zhixin to Wang Guoxing. And send Gao Wenkai after Du Zhiji. Li Ruoyan listened intently, memorizing every word. I watched Li Ruoyan tuck the list into his chest. He looked ready to tear the city apart, but he needed a nudge to handle his men properly. Take the brothers who weren't involved tonight, I told him firmly. Tell them this is a reward from me, but make sure they know it was you, their new commander, who secured it for them. Let them know you fought for what they deserved. Li Ruoyan froze. He was a rough man, a soldier by trade, but he wasn't stupid. He understood exactly what I was doing. I was handing him the prestige. I was giving him my money to buy the loyalty of his men. Only when the silver hit their palms would those guards truly recognize him as their big brother and their commander. I stood up and smoothed my sleeves. Take every Jinui who can still move and raid those old eunuchs' homes. Let your men get their hands dirty. Once you've shared the loot and spilled blood together, that's when a brotherhood becomes iron. Do you understand my meaning? I needed them bound by the same chain of interest. I wanted their hands stained with the blood of the powerful. Once they did this, there would be no turning back. They would have no choice but to follow me into the dark. Li Ruolian dropped to one knee and bowed deeply. I understand, Your Majesty. Go then, I said, looking toward the palace gates. The sun is about to rise. I hope that by the time it hits the city, there will be a few less pests and a bit more life in Beijing. As his silhouette disappeared, Wang Chinin shuffled over to the imperial desk, holding a warm cup of ginseng tea. Your Majesty, please, drink some tea to refresh yourself, he whispered. I didn't take it. Take it away. Just help me rest for a moment. I saw the tension leave the old eunuch's shoulders. For the last 2 weeks, I hadn't slept a wink. I had spent every night pacing this hall or staring blankly at the crumbling maps of my empire, sighing so loudly it felt like the roof of the Forbidden City might blow off. But tonight, after the blood had been spilled and the traitors' homes raided, I felt a strange sense of peace. There were no shouts from Li Zicheng's rebels, no wailing from the civil officials, and most importantly, no crooked neck tree on Coal Hill waiting for me. Your Majesty, it is time. The voice pulled me from my light sleep. I sat up, feeling a bit of strength returning to my limbs. In the early days of the dynasty, the morning court was a daily, grueling requirement. Later emperors changed it to every 5 days, but in my desperation to be the savior of the Ming, I had brought back the old, strict rules. I had worked myself to the bone, day and night, only to realize that hard work alone couldn't save a dying empire. Palace maids entered in a silent line, carrying my dragon robes and imperial crown. They washed me, tied my hair, and dressed me in the heavy golden silk. I stepped over the threshold and walked briskly toward the gate of supreme harmony. The Beijing spring wind felt dry and cold against my face. Outside the gate, the officials were already lined up by rank, civil on the left, military on the right. The whole crowd looked lifeless. Many of them had their hands tucked into their sleeves, yawning repeatedly, with dark circles hanging under their eyes. The whip cracked 3 times, signaling the start. The officials knelt in unison, their voices rising in a practiced, hollow chant. Long live the emperor! Long live the Ming! I sat motionless on the throne, my gaze scanning the crowd below. They were all such good actors. If there is business, speak. If not, the court is dismissed, Wang Chinin announced. Immediately, a vice minister from the Ministry of War rushed forward. His voice was shrill, almost a scream. A report from Shaanxi, 800 miles express. The rebels are overwhelming us and surging toward Xuanfu. Xuanfu is in crisis. We beg the court to send reinforcements and funds immediately. The hall fell silent, save for the sound of the minister's head thumping against the floor as he bowed. Then, several more officials scrambled out of line. A report, sire. A great drought in Hunan has turned the land to dust. The refugees are rising in revolt. Please open the granaries. The White Lotus sect in Shandong has resurfaced. They are killing officials and seizing cities. The bad news came in a relentless wave. In the past, I would have slammed my hand on the dragon chair and screamed at them for failing the country. But today, I stayed silent. I leaned back and watched them perform their tearful tragedies. It was a masterpiece of acting. Xuanfu was falling, Hunan was starving, Shandong was in chaos, and all these men could do was cry about being poor and shift the blame. They didn't have a single real plan. When they finally ran out of breath and couldn't squeeze out another tear, I spoke. I see. The 2 words hung in the air, light and indifferent. Ministry of War, draft a plan. Ministry of Revenue, check the vaults and see how much silver can be squeezed out. The ministers were stunned. Was I changing my stripes? Usually, when I heard they needed money, I'd pick a few unlucky souls to execute. Before they could process it, I waved my sleeve. Dismissed. I stood up and walked away, leaving a hall full of confused officials staring at each other, unable to read my pulse. Back in the West Warm Pavilion, I changed into a lighter robe and reclined on a daybed. Summon Wei Zaode, Zhang Jinyan, and Yang Ruqing, I ordered. Wei Zaode was the Grand Secretary, a man with a silver tongue who excelled at guessing what I wanted to hear, a pure opportunist. Zhang Jinyan was the head of the Ministry of War, the man who, in my past life, had personally opened the city gates for the rebels. Yang Ruqing was a fence-sitter through and through. These three were exactly what I needed. A moment later, they entered and bowed low. "Sit," I said, offering them tea. They looked flattered, sitting on the very edge of their stools. Wei Zaode's mind was already racing, thinking I was about to give him a massive promotion. "My dear ministers," I said, my voice dripping with exhaustion and fake irritation. "Today's court session has left me feeling stifled." Wei Zaode immediately chimed in, his face full of grief. "Is your majesty worried about the rebel bandits? We are incompetent for not easing your burdens. We deserve death." "The bandits?" I let out a cold laugh and slammed my teacup onto the side table. The water splashed onto the scrolls. "The bandits are just a skin disease. What truly breaks my heart are those virtuous officials who talk about ancestral laws every single day." The three of them jumped. I stood up and paced the room, letting my voice grow more erratic and angry. Fan Jingwen, the Minister of Works. Instead of fixing the defenses, he spends every day writing letters criticizing me. And Ni Yuanlu, I asked him to raise funds, and all he does is cry poverty and tell me to cut palace spending. I grabbed the sleeve of my robe, showing them the patches. The Empress herself sewed these patches. How much more can I cut? And then there's Li Banghua. I pointed toward the door, shouting. As the censor-in-chief, he doesn't investigate corrupt officials. He just stares at my mistakes. They aren't loyal ministers. They just want to step on my face to make themselves look like saints in the history books. I poured out a theatrical rage, playing the part of a narrow-minded, petty emperor perfectly. Wei Zaode and the others were practically vibrating with joy. Fan Jingwen, Ni Yuanlu, and Li Banghua were the clean officials who refused to play their games. Wei Zaode especially hated Li Banghua, who had once publicly insulted him. Realizing I had finally turned on the virtuous faction, Wei Zaode slid off his stool and knelt. "Your Majesty is wise. Those three rely on their seniority to disrespect the throne. I have heard that Fan Jingwen is building a faction in his ministry, promoting only his own students." Zhang Jinyan jumped in to twist the knife. "Your Majesty, Ni Yuanlu's accounts at the Ministry of Revenue have been messy for years. There must be embezzlement. He must be punished." Yang Ruqing banged his head on the floor. "Li Banghua is old and senile, full of empty talk that ruins the state. We must crush this evil wind." I looked down at the three of them, watching their ugly, traitorous display, and smiled inwardly. The trap was set. A cold chill settled in my heart, but I masked it well. This was exactly what I wanted. If I simply issued a decree to move Fan Jingwen and the other honest officials to Nanjing, the entire court would erupt in chaos. The censors would accuse me of exiling virtuous men, and those stubborn officials might even smash their heads against the palace pillars in protest. But if they were framed by their political enemies and demoted by a furious emperor, that was a different story. I suppressed my anger and adopted a tone of intimate trust. "Can you three share my burdens?" Wei Zaode looked like he had just won the lottery. He knelt so hard I heard his bones creak. "I am the emperor's sharpest blade. I will sweep away every traitor in the court." "Good," I laughed, clapping my hands together. "Tomorrow morning, I want to see your impeachment memorials. Make the language harsh. Make the crimes stick. I don't want them to stay in Beijing for another day. Kick them all out to Nanjing to rot in retirement." The three of them banged their heads on the floor in excitement. They left with glowing faces, thrilled at the chance to crush their rivals and send them to a hollow capital like Nanjing. As soon as they were gone, the smile vanished from my face. "Old Wang," I called out. "I'm here, Your Majesty," Wang Chenin replied, stepping from the shadows. I pulled another list from my sleeve and tossed it on the desk. "Go and summon a few more. Gong Dingzi, Liang Zhaoyang, Guang Xing. Bring them in." These men were notorious cowards, especially Guang Xing. In the history I knew, he was the one who blocked the crown prince from fleeing south, cutting off the Ming dynasty's last hope. When the rebels arrived, He surrendered faster than anyone. Scum like that had their uses, too. A few minutes later, the new group arrived. They were even more desperate for power than Wei Zayod. I repeated the performance, throwing out the names of loyal ministers like Fang Yuegong and Qiu Yuling. I complained about their stubbornness and arrogance. Gong Dingzi reacted like a wolf smelling blood. Your Majesty, these men are mere fame seekers. I will write the memorial myself to expose their crimes. Guang Xiang was even more eager. I'll go back right now. I'll make sure Fang Yuegong never shows his face in the scholarly world again. I nodded, my voice trailing off meaningfully as I looked at their greedy faces. Once these people are gone, the vacant seats in the palace. I have high hopes for you three. They nearly fainted from joy. They thought they were being promoted to the top. They marched out of the hall with their chests puffed out, ready to do my dirty work. The hall fell silent again. I picked up a fresh cup of tea and took a sip. It was bitter, but it left a sweet aftertaste. They thought I was helping them eliminate rivals. In reality, I was saving the seeds of the Ming dynasty. Only by being framed and demoted would those stubborn, loyal officials actually agree to leave for Nanjing with their pride intact. As for Wei Zayod and Guangxiang, I slammed the teacup onto the jade table. I would leave the high offices of Beijing to them. They could stay here and be buried alive with the city. The water clock in the palace ticked away. Suddenly, Wang Chinin stumbled over the high threshold, his shoes screeching against the floor. Your Majesty, the old eunuch gasped, his breathing ragged. He's here. Tang Tong, the general of Jijin, has arrived at the Chaoyang Gate with 8,000 men. I stood up instantly. In this dying empire, Tang Tong was the only general who actually answered the call to save the capital. In my memory of history, he was a complicated man. He eventually surrendered to the rebels, then to the Manchus. But right now, while every other general was making excuses to stay away, he had brought his entire life and soul into this death trap. In the original history, the emperor sent a eunuch to spy on him and gave his 8,000 soldiers a pathetic 4,000 taels of silver. Tang Tong got 40 taels, and his men got basically nothing. Bring him in, I commanded, walking around the desk. I want to see him immediately. Wang Chinin hesitated. But Your Majesty, he's a general with troops. According to the rules, the Ministry of War must verify his papers, and he must be searched and disarmed before entering the palace. To hell with those rotten rules. I snapped. The idiots at the Ministry of War don't know anything but how to take bribes. Bring him in now. 15 minutes later, the heavy clanking of armor echoed through the hall. A burly man with a thick beard entered under the watchful eyes of the secret police. His iron armor was battered, and his breastplate was covered in dried blood and yellow dust. He smelled of sweat and gunpowder. He looked stunned that he hadn't been searched or forced to strip his armor. He hit the floor hard, kneeling with both hands down. Tang Tong, General of Jijin, greets the Emperor. Long live Your Majesty. His voice was raspy, thick with the exhaustion of a forced march. I didn't sit on the throne. I walked down the steps and stopped just 3 feet from him. I saw his fatigue, his fear, and a hidden spark of hope. He was terrified of being suspected of treason, yet afraid of being used as cannonball fodder. Stand up and speak, I said calmly. Tang Tong didn't dare stand immediately. He knocked his head against the floor one more time before rising. He rubbed his rough hands against his war skirt, unable to look me in the eye. I heard the capital was in danger. I rode day and night. I only regret my horses couldn't go faster. Please, punish me for my delay. He was waiting for me to scream at him or give him some empty words of encouragement. You aren't late, I said, looking him in the eye. At a time like this, anyone who dares to ride into this death trap is a loyal servant of the Ming. I turned, grabbed a bright yellow scroll from the table, and tossed it right into his arms. Open it. Tang Tong fumbled with the scroll, his hands shaking as he unrolled the imperial decree. The ink was barely dry. It named him the Count of Dingxi, granted him a dragon-patterned robe, a jade belt, and the title of junior tutor to the crown prince. For a general in this era, you could spend your whole life eating sand at the border and watching your family die in battle without ever earning a hereditary title like this. His eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what he was holding.